A tumultuous week for the US president, approval ratings at a new low, another senior White House staffer sacked, and more criticism from his own Republican Party. What does it all mean for Donald Trump? This is Inside Story. I'm Hashim Al-Bara and welcome to the program. There hasn't been a dull moment in the White House since US President Donald Trump took office. In the past 8 months, there's been a series of executive orders and a string of high-profile departures. Yet the president insists there's no chaos in his administration. But the polls tell a different story. His approval ratings have plummeted, and members of his own Republican Party are questioning his capability as president, with some calling the White House a sinking ship. Trump has become increasingly isolated in recent months, shunned by major business leaders and at odds with his party's congressional leadership. And his comments after the violence in Charlottesville estranged him from more than half of the nation. Many are now beginning to wonder how long he will last as a president. Let's take a look at some of the senior figures who have resigned or been sacked by Donald Trump. The first casualty was acting Attorney General Sally Yates. Then came the firing of Trump's National Security Advisor Michael Flynn in February. The FBI Director James Comey was next in May. And then in July, Press Secretary Sean Spicer was shown the door. Chief of Staff Reince Priebus followed him out a week later. And the most recent sacking was Trump's chief strategist, Steve Bannon, leaving the president's daughter and advisor, Ivanka Trump, and son-in-law and aide, Jared Kushner, in his inner circle, and Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson, at the State Department. A leading Republican senator says Donald Trump has not yet shown the stability or competence required for an American president to succeed. Bob Corker of Tennessee has called for changes in how the White House operates.
I will say we're at a point where there needs to be radical changes take place at the White House itself. It has to happen. I think our president needs to take stock of the role that he plays in our nation and move beyond himself, move way beyond himself, and move to a place where daily he's waking up thinking about what is best for our nation.
A recent poll shows Donald Trump's popularity has been on a general downward trend since his inauguration. His approval rating fell to 35% in March when it was announced he dismantled President Obama's environmental program. But it fell to its lowest level, 34%, after he gave his first reaction to the Charlottesville violence just over a week ago. In the last 8 months, his approval ratings have never exceeded 50%. As of today, his approval rating is at 36%. Let's bring in our panel. We have Oliver McGee, former Trump advisor, who joins us from Washington, D.C. In Philadelphia, David A. Love, writer at the Philadelphia Citizen. And in New York, Jane Zaino, professor of political science and international studies at the Iona College. Welcome to you all. Let me start by asking Mr. McGee this. Mr. McGee, now that Bannon is out, will Trump finally embrace a new approach?
Well, Trump is actually Jacksonian in his use of what is quoted as the kitchen cabinet, which was created by Andrew Jackson. Essentially, Trump is actually opening up his circle 360, both inside and outside the White House. So the exit of Steve Bannon probably is a good thing because Steve Bannon is a little bit more freer to be more entrepreneurial in advising and counseling the president in his advice, counsel, and warning of the president and the administration. So I think that this is going to be a good opportunity for Trump to open up his kitchen cabinet. Essentially, Andrew Jackson said that the kitchen cabinet was the way to come back to the kitchen door.
I see your point.
The president. So we're seeing Trump becoming more Jacksonian and essentially looking at that type of advice and counsel.
Okay,
but also, Trump is also Jeffersonian in how he uses the media, because basically he's really very skillful in managing the media, both good and sometimes some may view as bad, but he's still managing the media as the power of communication and persuasion of the presidency. Jefferson oftentimes said that really I can only really talk about what I want to talk about to the press, and that's pretty much so I'll leave it at that.
I see your point.
And I think today we're seeing Trump turn the page to the Afghan war, which is really him managing the media to turn the page.
Let me go to Mr. Love. Mr. Love, do you see it the same way?
No, I don't see it the same way at all. I think what we're seeing is the unraveling of the Trump presidency. I will say that I do think Trump does have some similarities with President Jackson to the extent that the two of them are racist. But you know, from the beginning, this administration has been marked by greed, bigotry, and incompetence. And I think that what we're seeing now is just a continuation of that. The people who were supposed to be the moderating influences in the Trump administration, I'm thinking specifically about his daughter as well as his son-in-law, really never came through. And while we're seeing now this unraveling in terms of the white supremacy and his reaction to the Charlottesville incident last week, really white nationalists and white supremacists were always a part of his administration, an important part of his base. And even today, you still have nationalists, white nationalists and Nazis in his administration who I presume are advising him, particularly people such as Stephen Miller and Sebastian Gorka.
Okay.
So I don't see any changes.
You don't see
all.
Any changes. Ms. Zaino, do you think that the exodus of Steve Bannon ushers in a new era where the influence of the white supremacists, the nationalists or the populists is going to start waning at the White House?
You know, I think we in the media tend to overplay the importance of somebody like Stephen Bannon staying or going from the White House. Most people on the ground are not at all concerned about Steve Bannon. So he has left, and I live in New York. I know Donald Trump very well. His reputation is even when people go, he stays in clear and close contact with them, sometimes even more when they're outside of his circle than when they're in. So I think Steve Bannon is going to continue to have the ear of the president from Breitbart to the White House. So I don't see a waning of that wing at all. I think the real question here, and the only question is, can this president get a win? He cannot go into 2018 or 2020 with the only thing he can tell the American public he's done is get the Gorsuch nomination approved. That's not going to be enough for anybody. And so that's what I think this is about. Steve Bannon had to go. He's still close to the president. This is about the president trying to get a win. They lost on health care. They lost on immigration. They have to try to get something with tax reform or infrastructure, or go back to healthcare, or go back to, you know, immigration. But they've got to get a win, and the calendar is really working against them here. They come back to a debt ceiling and a budget fight, and right into 2018. That's what we should be talking about, is the legislative
I see your point.
agenda.
You're basically,
that 8 months in, he has had no wins.
You're basically saying that a legislative win in the near future could be at the turning point. But however, let's dissect the legacy of Steve Bannon in a way or another. And let me go back to Mr. McGee. Mr. McGee, Bannon was known for basically saying that presidents should not reach out to the moderates, to the independents or to the Democrats because his own base is safe and solid. Do you think this now paves the way for Trump to sort of engage the independents and the Democrats to be able to send a message of unity to the Americans?
Well, we are all Democrats. We are all Republicans. 50% of the American people.
No, but this is not the reality on the ground. You're talking about, Mr. McGee, you're talking about a country that has been beset by divisions, violence, and unprecedented mood within the White House. So, I mean, there is a huge political crisis anyway.
We're seeing Trump being Trump. Let Trump be Trump. This is what got him elected. This is what the base is saying. The base is saying, we like the way he's communicating for us because we don't have a voice. We have one news outlet that really speaks to conservatives, which is Fox News. The rest is basically on the left. They're saying, keep going, Trump. Get something done. Jobs, jobs, jobs. Infrastructure, infrastructure. Tax reform. If we don't get tax reform, the stock market, which is already in the expectations of that will be a disaster. We need to have that tax reform so we can do the expectations of the stock market. And I think that the Trump agenda is on track, moving in that direction. Right now, tonight, he's going to be talking about the Afghan war. Well, that's just about the guns and the money. And then at the same time, he's going to be moving into the direction of the economy, pushing that agenda through. Once he gets tax reform through, the economy and the business leaders will be much, much sound and much more clear about where they would need to take their companies and where they're going. When the CEOs leave, they're just simply basically stepping out for a moment in the hot heat, but at the same time, they're still protecting their interests of their corporate interests and making earnings.
But then again,
they need that tax reform.
Mr. McGee, you seem to...
And Trump is aware of that.
Underestimate or ignore at least the fact that the people have been very, very angry about what's going on the ground and telling Trump's advisor that they have to distance themselves from them. And let me go to Mr. Love. Mr. Love, do you think that Trump can make any legislative win in the near future, particularly when it comes to tax reform or the Obamacare?
No, I don't think there's anywhere for Trump to go at this point. He had his opportunity with the attempt to repeal and replace Obamacare. With Republican majorities in both houses of Congress, it was a dismal failure. He's not going to get tax reform passed, I believe, because he has no mandate. With 36% approval, he has no mandate for anything at this point. And I think that to the extent that you're seeing people in his own party, particularly conservatives with strong conservative credentials speaking out against him, tells you that they are starting to pave a way without Trump in the mix. And I think that's important. You know, once he spoke out in favor of white supremacists, Nazis, anti-Semites, that's when his administration began to die. And there's nowhere else for him to go at this point.
Zeno, don't you think that this also offers or provides, puts the Democrats in a very delicate situation at the same time? Because before, Bannon was the rallying point for them. Aiming for Trump, they would go after Bannon. But with Bannon's departure, they might find a huge problem in the near future.
Yeah, and I'm so glad you raised the Democrats, because I think, you know, we also have to look at where the Democrats are at this point. With Steve Bannon out, you're right, they don't have him to kick around anymore. But I think the bigger problem for the Democrats is they, too, need to have a positive agenda going forward. And just as you see fights within the Republican Party as to who they are and what they're going to be identified as, with Donald Trump on one side and the quote-unquote establishment on the other, you see a very similar break in the Democratic Party, where you see a Hillary Clinton wing still, and you see a more Bernie Sanders wing. And this is a party that has aged out. I can tell you, I am with young people all the time. I had many, many young Democrats really frustrated in the last election because they see this as a party that does not speak to young people. And of course, it is a party that needs new, fresh, young leadership. But under Barack Obama, they lost 1,000 seats. That's a big loss. They need to build their bench, and that's going to require an agenda. And so the Democrats have their work cut out for him, as do the Republicans. And, you know, so we have these three factions, a White House, a Republicans and Democratic Party in the legislature. And unfortunately for the American public, the agenda, whatever agenda people are supporting to go forward, it's going to be very tough to get any headway on fixing the real problems we face, number one being jobs in the economy, all the way down through issues of security, infrastructure, immigration, healthcare, the list goes on and on.
I see your point. Mr. McGee, you seem to be optimistic that Trump would eventually be able to navigate through the complex political landscape in Washington. Are you confident that the Republicans will be able to consolidate gains in the midterm elections?
Absolutely. We're seeing nothing different than the run to the presidency for Donald Trump. The campaign was equally as fractious and equally as debating as your previous guest just articulated beautifully. The Democrats are basically searching, the Republicans are basically searching, and in the middle came in Trump, who basically did a corporate takeover of the GOP, and basically he is basically here to establish the mega agenda. The mega agenda has to be on track because this is where 7 out of 10 Republicans are waiting patiently and expecting for that, and half of the country wants this agenda to go. Growth, 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 jobs, jobs, jobs. We need jobs, and we need basically to build the crumbling infrastructure inside the United States. Because right now we have the have-nots in the cities and we have the haves in the county lines. And when you look at the electoral map, this thing wasn't defined by state boundaries, blue states and red states. It was defined by city limits and county lines. And basically all of that was red. And they're asking for, this election wasn't about change, it was about enough. Enough of the gridlock in Washington, D.C. and get something done. That's the challenge that's faced with the Trump agenda right now.
Let's include Mr. Love. Mr. Love, we have a president dragging a nation into uncertainty, a Republican elite distancing itself from Trump, and a Democratic Party trying to reinvent itself. What do you think will be the top issues on the agenda during the midterms, and whether the Democrats will be able to sort of make gains, particularly at the Senate?
Well, I think looking at the midterms, well, I'm of the belief that Trump will not even be president at that point. But I would have to think that, as usual, economics would have to be one of the main issues. And the fact that this administration really hasn't delivered in terms of the things that it promised. This does present a very advantageous position for the Democrats, should they choose to actually take advantage of it. I'm not sure if they're in a position to do that, but also given the fact that there is so much support eroding from the Trump administration, I believe that the Democrats are well poised to begin to talk about the issues of inequality and other issues as far as economics go that this administration refuses or has been unable to really tackle.
Okay. Ms. Zaino, do you think the purge of the white supremacists and the populists will continue in the coming weeks?
I'm not sure it's going to continue, and I have to say that I believe that this is more a part of who Donald Trump is rather than people coming and hoisting this message on him. And quite frankly, we've seen a Southern strategy out of the Republican Party going back well into Ronald Reagan's candidacy in 1980, and people like some of his advisors who designed that. So I think we have to be very careful to say, I don't think this is going to leave Donald Trump just because you fire people out of the White House. That said, I think when you're talking about the midterm election, the map looks very bad for the Democrats. We have a gerrymandered House in which most of the districts are in Donald Trump's favor. So I think the Democrats have got to be very careful that they don't fall into the trap that Steve Bannon of all people talked about. They should focus on inequality, but they have to have a positive message of how they're going to fix the economic equality in this country. Otherwise, they're going to have a really tough time just logistically with this map, which totally works against them.
I would like to move on to foreign policy, if you don't mind. Mr. McGee, in the past, I think the swing of influence was somehow tilting towards the cabal in the White House that was in favor of an isolationist approach, America First approach. Do you think that with the departure with Bannon, we're going to see a president embracing the ideas of the three generals, McMaster and Mattis and Kelly?
What we're seeing right now as the president prepares for his address to the nation on the Afghan war is that he's being ordered and Kellyized inside the White House, because ultimately the presidency is about the diplomacy, the guns and the money, and most importantly, the law and order. So he's getting down to the essence of the business of the presidency, and that is that you have to be able to prosecute a war. This war has been going on for 16 years. He's saying maybe we need to step back a little bit and maybe look at a private-public partnership in dealing with how to get control in the Afghan war. A war that goes on for 16 years and really doesn't have a direction to come to end, that's what the president is concerned about. And he's going to address that appropriately with the nation tonight. But I believe that foreign policy is going to always step front in any presidency, including the Trump presidency, because whether we may want to focus on domestic agendas, the very tough global world is always front and center. There are issues that are all over in the Middle East and also in the China region that is always going to keep the attention of this White House. And
this
I
is
believe
exactly
that what we're seeing in the organization under Kelly is to beat those thinkers around him so he can get that advice and counsel.
Exactly. This is why I would like to hear from Mr. Love. Mr. Love, we've seen some very mixed messages in the past from the White House, the State Department about a crisis in the region, particularly in the GCC. Trump more in favor of the Saudi approach, while Tillerson was trying to strike a balanced note on North Korea. Trump saying something contradicted by Steve Bannon. Are we finally going to get some sense of clarity about a U.S. foreign policy globally?
I doubt it. I'm concerned about U.S. foreign policy because, currently we're witnessing the dismantling of the U.S. State Department under Rex Tillerson. There are so many key positions that are not being filled, and in the absence of a strong, diplomatic force, you're going to have all of these mishaps that we're seeing around the world.
But maybe because he was...
I just want to make a point.
Just maybe because Tillerson was undermined by Bannon in the past, and now the departure of Bannon would give him more opportunity to sort of clean up the White House, the State Department. Don't you think so?
It's possible, but I have my doubts, and I say that because this is a president who has so many financial entanglements. We don't know if he is making decisions in terms of the military that are going to ultimately benefit himself and his cohorts financially. You look at Afghanistan. I'm concerned that Eric Prince, the founder of Blackwater, who happens to be the brother of Trump's Secretary of Education, wants to privatize the war in Afghanistan and set up essentially what would be the modern-day version of the British East India Company. For billions of dollars a year, he's going to do this. And that's a big concern. And I think that's just one of many concerns that people have about the Trump foreign policy and military policy, and the fact that decisions are being made potentially to benefit people economically, and also Trump is an unstable person.
Ms. Zaino, I know that you've been saying from the beginning of the program that this is not about who comes in or who goes, but it's more about the very nature of the President Trump. This is someone who has been very critical of international organizations like the United Nations, like NATO. Do you think that there is an opportunity here for a new narrative when it comes to US-EU, for example, relations, or US-NATO relations, or US-UN relations?
I really don't see that. I think what we're going to see tonight, and what we see with, quite frankly, every presidency, is presidents come in, as you accurately mentioned, like Donald Trump talking about isolationism. They get into the office, and the real governing powers at work in the United States take over. And now we've seen a President Trump who has bombed in Syria. We've seen now a President Trump who is likely tonight to call for increased troop levels in Afghanistan, and he will blame that on the war on terrorism, when in fact the U.S. has funded and been part and parcel of helping those terrorist groups in the past, in Afghanistan and elsewhere in that part of the world. And so, as much as I think we want to say that these presidents and individuals come in with ideas of isolationism or whatever it is, the United States as a country has interests, and those interests are not the interests we hear about when presidents come out to speak, nor are they the interests, quite frankly, we hear about on the campaign trail.
I really appreciate your insights, but unfortunately we have to leave it there. Thanks to all our guests, Oliver McGee, David Love, and Jane Zaino. And thank you too for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/ AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Hashim Mahalbara, and the whole team here. Bye for now.